Hannah, Hannah, Mail here, back for more content on my multi-video series on ancient Egypt. So in our last segment, we were talking, or I was talking about the ancient capital of Memphis, which is one of the capitals that Egypt had over its long time span of history. And I was saying that the bulk of the remains in terms of temples and religious structures that we have for ancient Memphis now lie in the modern village of Mitrina, which is in the general area of Cairo, but it's like on the outskirts. So this is from the Digital Egypt website resource, and it is a graphic which gives you where the Nile may have run in antiquity, because as I've talked about before, the Nile branches and the Nile River itself has shifted and changed course over time. So if you look at this graphic, you'll see where they marked the probable flow of the Nile uh, for Memphis in ancient Egyptian times versus the approximate area where the Nile flows today. And just from that you can see that there's definitely been movement and change. And then that village of Mitrina is somewhere in this general area here. And they've marked those two as ruin fields. So this is for this graphic showing you what's left of ancient Memphis in a very broad sense. And one of the things that we see in Mitrena is the foundation, so what's left of a temple. Here, and this graphic is also from Digital Egypt. You can see it's a little bit more zoomed in view of one of those ruin sites or ruin fields. I'm not sure which one of these it is, but it is one of these. So again, we're still in this general area. We have the foundations left both of temples as well as possible palace complexes. So this is a structure here that was likely from the inscriptional evidence and archaeological evidence that has been found. The thesis is that it was built under the orders of Ramses II, and it probably replaced an earlier New Kingdom temple of Thutmose the Fourth. And the ear and found in the foundations of this temple were multiple ear stele, which had a private votive significance. But this, in terms of earlier temple there, and then Ramses II freed resources to have a new one built, goes back to what I talked about before, is this consistent reuse and reconfigurations of space over time. There was also, they think, a small temple to Ptah and a temple to Hathor. And then here we have one of the mortuary chapels of one of the New Kingdom rulers, and then a possible palace complex here. But those ear stele were found somewhere in the foundations of this building here. And what's interesting about the ear stele is, first of all, their form. So they literally depict one or several ears, and some of them don't actually have any inscriptions. Some have a short inscription and or show the dedicator. And the deity mentioned on the stela is sometimes not given a particular name, but it's given this general name of Sejem Nech or Sejem Nachet, who hears prayers. And the idea behind these ear stelae seem to be that they, through giving an ear to the people who dedicated this, they draw the attention of the god to the people in whatever requests they have. So this is also from Digital Egypt, and these are just some of the um, finds that were found in the West Hall with those ear steel there. So this is a screenshot from Digital Egypt where I took of two of those ear stelae. So you can see this one here. It looks like it's uninscribed. It literally just has the ears that, are meant to have the deity hear whatever this request is. Whereas this one looks like it's possibly inscribed up here with at least part of a name, maybe. And the the interesting thing about these ear steel play is the way that I read these two is they were found um in the foundations of Ramses of the new temple that Ramses II ordered built. So the educated guess is that they actually date to the reign of Thutmose the Fourth, and this goes back to our um, context for objects change over time. So this is my personal guess in terms of like what happened and kind of the order of events based on what I know about Egyptian religion. I don't know if it is fully correct. So people who know more about either this site or about the context of these finds, definitely feel free to correct me in the comments. But my guess is when Thutmose the Fourth died, those stelae were at multiple points or just at one point deposited in his temple by private people that were asking for his aid in some way, because it does seem that Egyptian rulers after they died did undergo process of deification. In some sense, some it seems tried to have that process kind of jump started while they were still living. And then a little bit later, we have the that earlier temple of Thutmose the Fourth being demolished or built over by the new temple that Ramses the Second wanted put in. But these objects were uncovered at some point when they were laying the foundations of Ramses the Second's temple. And these objects were still spiritually charged. So they were still active in some way. Like you couldn't just toss them in the river because these objects still had power. So that's why my hunch is that they put them in the foundations of the temple that was going to be put in place next, because it's a way that they can still be shown respect, they can still be kept safe, but they also room is now made for the things that Ramses the Second wants in his temple. You see a similar phenomena not in these temple caches of Luxor and Karnak, where eventually these spaces become literally like filled with statues and various objects, and they just need to eventually make space for new things to come in. But they don't want to dishonor the objects and the the spirits that they represent sometimes by just tossing them. So there's been a couple times where under the floors of the Karnak or Luxor temple complexes, they've found these object caches where multiple statues or steel plates or other objects have been put under the floor so that room can be made for new ones coming in. And one of the other things that is in the village of Mitrena that is part of what was likely a temple space is a Ramesside colossal statue of Ramesses II. So the colossal statue, I think, is there. And in the 19th century, when Egypt became a tourist destination for the West, that was one of the things that people went to see because the statue was somewhat buried and like had fallen on its side. So that was one of the things that if you went to see the village of Reina, probably, on your list of things to check off to see was this very large statue that was just kind of laying in the ground. This is also from Digital Egypt, and it is only a fragment of what was once a full royal decree by Horemheb, who was a later New Kingdom pharaoh. But the interesting thing, and part of the reason why I highlighted it is because it talks about some of the temples and some of the religious spaces that were there, and Horemheb seemingly putting forward money to have some of those spaces repaired and basically towards their upkeep. This also is a good object because it goes back to what I've talked about before in terms of the Egyptian way of dating things and our way of dating things. So only this beginning part is preserved of what was once a full royal decree. Um, and this is also a good object because again, it shows you how would you even start to read this. So if you look at each register, so each line that's going across, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And so you logically you would start with this first line, but then the question is asked, okay, do I start reading from the right or from the left? The reason you know that you start reading from the left and end at the right, so start here and end here for definitely this register, and this register, and this register, and this register, is because the animals and or people in each register are facing towards the left. So that's how you know, okay, I start here. So like what looks like a hawk or some kind of bird, that's facing left. Same thing here, what looks like a duck or kind of waterfowl facing left. And you kind of go down the line. So in terms of the date of this object, part of the way we know it was a royal decree of Horemheb is because we have his regnal or part of his regnal year here. And then we have one of his personal names in the cartouche here. So this full block reads year, because I think this is where it breaks off. So year 5, or regnal year 5. So regnal year 5, and then whatever was here, we no longer have. Under the majesty of Horus, so we get some of Horemheb, or some of the honorific names for Egyptian rulers that you see over and over through this line: King of Upper and Lower Egypt. So that king of Upper and Lower Egypt was a common epithet of rulership that speaks to the ancient geography. Um, and then finally here we are getting to one of the personal names of this ruler. So Dej R. Keperu Sept Ep Nepre, which is the name in the cartouche here. And then we have some more epithets, about how great he is. And finally, we kind of get to the start of what this royal decree is actually doing, kind of what it is about. So, it's definitely talking about a building because it ends with he, i.e., this ruler made it as his work of eternity, it having fallen into ruin. But this speaks to the fact that Memphis, even though by the New Kingdom, Thebes was the main um, kind of religious state capital, Memphis was still valuable and was still conceived of as one of the capitals of Egypt. And you still had people living there and administrative work going on there and state attention um, devoted to buildings there, which this is, one of the kind of evidences of that. And then even past the New Kingdom, when you get into Greco-Roman times, Memphis was still being lived in. It was still having things built in it. The buildings that were already there were still being repaired. So this is from Digital Egypt. And these are fragments of columns that we know come from Roman and Byzantine buildings that were once fully in ancient Memphis. And like Christianization in other parts of Egypt, Memphis, it seems, also had a degree of Christianization because Petrie in Memphis excavated the remains of a church. So again, that conversion of sacred of pagan space into Christian sacred space that we see in Coptic Egypt extended to Memphis. This is just a more in-depth view of one of those capitals from Digital Egypt. And the Byzantine tells us that it's the later Roman Empire. So definitely after the 200s CE. All right. Now I'm going to sort of switch switch gears and talk a little bit more in depth about Egyptian beliefs surrounding death and the afterlife and the different tomb shape possibilities that you might see through time. So the most well-known Egyptian type of tomb, partly because it's definitely one of the fanciest, is the so-called mastaba tombs. And that the mastaba part comes from the Arabic word for bench because they do kind of, especially in their above ground parts, they do look a little bit like a bench. So the mastaba form has two basic elements, and this is in fact true for most of the tomb types, is they have the actual burial chamber that is somewhere below ground where the actual body itself is deposited. And then they have above ground, they have a certain amount of space or spaces where the living are meant to come and interact with the spirits of the deceased and leave offerings and things like that. And depending on the tomb type, there's usually a shaft or some kind of passage that joins those elements together, at least for non-royal people. So the first type of this to emerge is the mastaba tomb in the Old Kingdom. So these are elite tombs, or sorry, in the Old Kingdom. So these are elite tombs that you see at Saqqara, you see them at Giza and other places as well within the pyramid fields. And they have, in terms of their above ground spaces that the living were meant to access and kind of interact with, you have the chapel um, with with various paraphernalia, including a false door. Then you have a chamber behind that that is the so-called, or that's been given the term Ser-Dab chamber by Egyptologists. And then you have the shaft, which leads down to the actual underground burial chambers. And this mess and this mastaba usually had a roof as well. So a lot of the objects that you see from the Old Kingdom in museums come from these mastabas, and they come either from the offering chapel here or the Ser-Dab chamber, and then sometimes from the actual burial chamber itself. And the this this space that was like right behind the Ser-Dab chamber was one of the liminal spaces where kind of the living could or where the deceased could communicate with the living. And that was partly the idea behind these false doors as well. But a lot of these mastabas were uncovered in the 19th century and early 20th, and they're very fancy. And so a lot of them were taken out of their original chapel context and put into museums. And this is a link that I put in the discussion box for if you want to take a closer look at some stabas that have been digitally reconstructed through Sketchfab. So this is that same model that I showed you, but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of, especially at Giza, which is where I think this one is from, what is left of a lot of these mastabas above ground. So on most of them, the roof is either gone or like very little of it remains. Um, and the entrance um, to the Mastaba Chapel, that again, in times when this was used as a burial site, would probably have had a door or some sort of thing barring access. So I think that's meant to be the entrance here. And then you can see most of the walls are still intact. And it's really mostly the roof that's gone. So you would have to enter into this mastaba chapel. And then when you enter in, that's when you would hit the burial shaft, which then would lead down to where the actual body was buried. So one of the common artifact classes in museums from ancient Egypt is the Ser-Dab statues. So again, these were statues that were in this chamber here. So basically immediately behind, or mostly immediately behind the tomb chapel. And this wall was sealed up. So the Serdab statues, a lot of times, were not actually meant for the living to see them. They were there because it was thought that the deceased could spiritually kind of inhabit them, and thereby travel in and out of the uh, chapel and receive the food offerings and things like that, or members of her or his family. Because we do, starting in the Old Kingdom, we have Ser Dab statues that don't just depict the owner of the tomb, usually is, which tends to be male, but also can be female. But you also have Serdab statues that depicts members of the family that may or may not be living at that time. So this is um, the Digital Giza is a project that was um, done by Dr. Manwelian and his collaborators at Harvard University. And what this project does is they have scanned basically all the information that they can find about the different excavations that took place on the Giza Plateau, which includes excavations of these mastabas that were there. And they've uploaded them into this database. And when you search in individual images, it also tends to give you the session number and where or which museum that object has ended up in. So what's really cool is you can look at the original excavation photo for multiple Sayar Dab statues and other objects and see the object in its original context. And then a lot of museums now have digitized their objects, so you can do online collection searches and then see that object in kind of its new context as a museum object. And I've found this helpful because it does give you kind of a larger sense of what these objects were once used by. And this is also why I'm trying to honor the spirit of these persons because this was a tomb. In this case, it's a female Ser Dab statue. It looks like this was originally a male tomb with the wife and the male tomb owner, because on the left, so on this image here, this is the image from Digital Giza archives. And so it tells you that it's in Cemetery G, so it gives you the location of where this tomb was in the Giza Plateau. It tells you that it's in the Ser Dab area. So if we go back to our graphic, we're in kind of this general region here. And it tells, and for both of these statues, it gives the session number and the museum that they are currently at. So you have Hearst, or what I want to focus attention on is the female figure. So here you have Hearst 6/19/77/3, which is the female figure on the left here. And then since I have the accession number and I have the museum where this object is, I was able to go to the Phoebe Hearst Museum online collection search type this session number in, and it came up on their digital collections. So this is the same statue as this, but this is that statue cleaned up and numbered as a museum object in kind of its new context. And this is also interesting because again, it speaks to using size as kind of an indicator of importance, which we've talked about with the Narmer palette and with other things. So if you look at these two stair dab statues, you see that it's the female and male figure, and the male is slightly larger. This is one of the reasons that's kind of leading me without knowing all the details about this tomb to kind of make an educated guess that this is probably a male tomb. And so what we're seeing here is likely the tomb owner and his wife, just because the male figure is slightly bigger. Again, Egyptologists who know more about this particular tomb, definitely feel free to correct me if I am wrong. And then this is from the Phoebe Hearst Museum online collections search. They've also translated what the inscription says on the statue. So we have this woman's name. And we also have her occupation. Shem, Netcher, Pruitt, Cher, Nebbit, Ew, went in Takas. So the Hathor priestess, so this woman was a priestess of Hathor, and Lady of Ew, Nert. So we also get what general area she's from, and then finally we get her name in Takas. We also have, because of course not everyone had the economic resources to have a big fancy tomb like Stapa, and so we also throughout Egyptian history, particularly from the third dynasty on, and this graphic is from the Digital Egypt site, we have shaft tombs, which are essentially exactly what they sound like, where you dig a hole in the ground, and there's a shaft or passage to the body, and you might either with the body or maybe above ground in kind of that general space, put a steel or other other grave marker of some kind. And you can have shaft graves for people who don't have a lot of resources, and I could again be wrong about this, but I think some recent scholarship has suggested that even people who had lots of resources sometimes did shaft graves for other purposes as well. So this is from Digital Egypt, and it is giving you the image on the left side, and it is giving you a map of most or all of the known graves at the site of Badari, so that's what those numbers represent. And the reason that I picked this particular one is because within this there are shaft graves, and in terms of where Badari is, it is in lower or upper Egypt, and it's in the general area of the Eastern Dead of the Eastern Desert. So that's why I put that screenshot map there to kind of give you a sense of where the overall site is geographically. Um, and what I want you to focus on um, is these numbers down here, because what the digital Egypt site also has that's really helpful is it has tomb inventories for a lot of these sites. So um, they have a tomb inventory for Badari, and looking through those tomb numbers, I found in this general area, because this is grave number starting at 5,300 through 5,400, and looking further at those. So I zoomed. I This is a zooming in um, of this general area here, just so you can see the numbers a little bit clearer. But Dari tomb 5313, so 5313, so it's somewhere in this cluster, at least according to this info. But it dates from the early first intermediate period, and it is a shaft tomb grave of a pregnant woman. So this is also why I think saying that prayer, because this woman probably wanted food and drink and her name to be remembered. And I hope that that happens for her if, her spirit is still floating around, because this was a woman that, was once alive. And so I'm trying to honor and respect that. So this is representing the shaft that the body came down, and then where it was eventually deposited there. And what Digital Egypt also really helpfully does is, for a lot of these tombs, they have the original tomb cards if they have them in their collections. And on the site, they tell you the finds. And then depending on the level and amount of information they have, what they've also done is, for some of the finds, they've put them, broadly speaking, in the um, graphics, so in their drawing, where they were originally found. And so what you can do is you can click on some of the finds, and it'll take you to actual images of them. And this is just a note that they have where there's a discrepancy with some of the finds, with some of their records, and it looks like the record or records on the original tomb card, because this is one of those burials that was first uncovered in the 19th or early 20th century. So early 20th, because it's from 1927. Um, so I just wanted to kind of show you that. All right, this is where I'm going to end this particular content. Stay tuned for more. And if you want to dive deeper into topics that either I've already covered, or you want to know other elements about ancient Egypt or ancient history that I haven't talked about in this video series, I do ancient history virtual sessions for $10 to $20 on hour. So hope to see you again soon.